And good evening. Today is still Tuesday, June 15th, 2021, and I am still your host, Evan George, and welcome to the Bostopia Nightly Edition. And if I sound a little better, a little clearer, a little crisper, I just bought a new mic that I'm very excited about. I went with the old school snowball model. So if you notice a difference, you know why. And you are all welcome because I know my last mic cracked and popped every now and then. But the first story that I want to get to tonight is actually a tweet. And this is from somebody who actually took the time to look back at some polling data. And always, this music is brought to you by Mayoral, that I recommend you all check out from my good friend Ryan Scally. And here's the tweet. Interesting number from Emerson's April poll. And I reported on this poll at the time, which basically showed, I think at this point, it was Michelle Wu in first, behind Kim Janey, Anissa Sabi George was probably maybe fourth or fifth. And someone, because the full data I never saw, I normally just report on the synopses that are reported on by the media. But Jesse Hahn, from co-host of the Cod Cabin, which is another Mass Poly podcast that I also listen to. I don't know what ET After Dark Pod is. I might have to check that out. But I guess he went back and looked at the data from the Boston mayoral poll and kind of did some correlation between the people who support one of the candidates and whether or not they support Black Lives Matter. Reading it for you. Wu supporters. Just going to say it as a percentage. 81% of Wu supporters in the poll supported the phrase Black Lives Matter, with 15%, we'll call it, being against. Contrast that with Kim Janey, who just underneath at 79% support, 18% against. Definitely within the margin of error of whatever this poll margin was. And then, not at all surprisingly, but still always shocking to see, Anissa Sabi George supporters, only 22% agreed with the phrase or view Black Lives Matter positively, with 66% being against it. It should go without saying that Anissa Sabi George is the most conservative candidate in the Boston mayoral race. But considering that Anissa herself is a person of color, seeing how much her supporters reject Black Lives Matter as a phrase at 22 versus 66, it is rather incredible. And it definitely points to just how white and probably wealthy her support comes from. And keep in mind that the most recent poll had Anissa Sabi George as the front runner, though some people view that as a bubble. I can't tell you how to view it, to be honest. All of these polls are months out. The general voters, who are going to be a very small population of people who vote in municipal elections, they are really not paying that closely attention to what's going on. You are the rarity. The people who listen to shows like this are the people who follow the news as closely as I do. But I found this fascinating. Though not too much enlightening, always shocking to see. The second story that I wanted to get to before the main segment tonight, which is going to be part two of the Boston Police Department's union forum that we listened to yesterday, because I found it incredibly enlightening and entertaining. And I have some good stuff about the role of the police that I want to share with you as well. And this has been a question that has perplexed me for months now. And this is about why is it that Massachusetts has yet to pass any legalized sports betting? One of the major sports betting platforms, DraftKings, its headquarters is in Boston. It's in Massachusetts. There are, reading now from the article, at least 31 states that have some version of authorized sports betting, including New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, all of our surrounding neighbors. I guess I don't see Vermont and Maine on that list, but whatever. Boston is seen as a sports hub in terms of NHL, basketball, hockey. Which one did I forget? Maybe football. And so it's always been shocking to me, again, considering how much money there is for the taking, how big of a market we are for sports betting. Why is it that Massachusetts is yet to pass this? Because 99 times out of 100, it has to do with capital. It has to do with what does the wealthy in an area want. And generally, that is largely correlated to what bills do or do not pass. So even that, again, it didn't fall with me within that usual framework because there is so much money to be made. And so why wasn't it getting done? And it took this article by Schrodenberg from Commonwealth Magazine that finally kind of gave me the lens that I needed. Because up until this point, the only people that I personally know who are against this are bookies, are 55-year-old men who do illegal sports betting, and they would view this as threatening their market, even though those people understand that their clientele are not going anywhere. So they are not really threatened by a bunch of, again, 60 or 70-year-old guys downloading the apps. Like, that's not a realistic problem for them. So it didn't make sense to me. But reading now from the article, the Joint Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies is holding another hearing on sports betting this Thursday. Well, I might have to try to find that, with 19 different bills under consideration. And now here we're getting closer. Because whether to not legalize sports betting does not seem to be the actual question. What seems to be the question is how and where will you be allowed to sports bet? And this is when there is a split between capital, where there's a split between the people who are seeking to make a profit. Looking for it now. One interesting wrinkle to the debate was raised at a hearing on racial equity on Monday, when Springfield Representative Orlando Ramos, a Democrat, advocated for his own sports betting proposal, which would let bars and restaurants host games rather than just casinos and digital apps. And so now this is when I start to see the split, because you could theoretically legalize sports betting here in Massachusetts and say you can only do it digitally. You could say you could only do it at the casinos. You could say, what these people want, you could only do it at bars and restaurants and casinos, and you can't do it digitally. And so now we start to see different people trying to corner what is a very wealthy market. Now it falls right back in the material lens. It makes perfect sense to me why, again, it is that we have not legalized it yet. Is because there is infighting over, should everyone share in this big pie? Should we just let digital apps take the majority of the revenue? Or should we maybe push people to brick and mortar institutions like casinos, like restaurants, like bars, where they can do their sports betting there? And now it all clicks. So to put a bow on it, I would be shocked if we legalize sports betting and yet do not let us use apps like DraftKings or FanDuel. However, looking at this, it does clarify, at least for me, why there are people trying to stop us from rushing into, quote unquote, rushing into legalized sports betting. And I needed this article to explain that to me. So thank you very much. That was the missing piece that I needed. Now is a good time to say that if you were joining me on TikTok, I recommend switching to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, just because when I start showing video, just a lot more probably engaging, entertaining. I look at you a lot more, but that's okay if you'd rather stay there. And as always, for people watching me, please do like, subscribe, share the show. That's how I get motivated to continue to spend my time talking about all this. And before we go into where we left off from yesterday's Boston Mayoral Forum, some highlights as a recap, and then there is something that I want to go into about a book that I just started reading. What we saw was, well, first, Kim Janey and Andrea Campbell refused to participate. The conservative candidates, Anissa Sabi George, John Santiago, John Barros, more than thrilled to speak to police officers. They drooled and praised them and did other things. For some reason, last episode I cursed a lot, so I'm going to be a little more professional tonight. And Michelle Wu also attended. And overall, I was disappointed in Michelle Wu's, we'll call it posture, we'll call it tone in her vocabulary. I think she should have used this to clearly define her stance as one that supports public safety rather than falling into giving condolences to the police rather than sidestepping clear black or white stances. I think that represents a little bit more of her willingness to say the right thing depending on where she is, and is why, though I am again fully endorsing and supporting Michelle Wu, she is the only clear progressive in the race from a number of different policies and metrics, have a lot of hesitancy over how she will govern if she is not able to speak plainly and truthfully regardless of where she is. So I was critical of her yesterday. We'll see how her answers out today. Now, I wanted to read a couple segments from this book that I just started, Badges Without Borders, that I highly recommend, by Stuart Schrader. And I've been on a Cold War kick recently. I've read a few books on American intervention. The Jakarta Method definitely stands out. Empire's Workshop stands out. I just listened to a 5-part series on the JFK assassination, so all this stuff is just kind of fresh in my head. And I made the point on Twitter a few days ago that a lot of our immigration current immigration policy stems from the lessons learned from our imperial wars from the past half century. And what this book does is it ties in America's police state with the lessons learned internationally, with our foreign policy from the 1945, really until present day, and how we are policing each other from the 1965 onward very much is reinforced through the lessons learned of how we trained militaries, how we funded right-wing coups, how we funded death squads, what we saw worked there, didn't work there, to then come back here and use those lessons against the American population, which for some historians is a very good indicator and measurement of the definition of fascism. When the violence used on an imperial colony, that those same tactics and violence are then used internally to, I'll call it, sequester your own internal population. It was one of the most common definitions of fascism. And so a few sections of this book is in the 1960s, mid 1960s, after or ongoing with the civil rights era, there was a massive increase in violence in America. And that is 100% true. Murders, thefts, rapes, all massively increased in the mid-1960s. And for liberals, for conservatives, they viewed this through a cultural lens. And their argument to why this was happening was, the wasn't called it then, but the Black Empowerment movement of the 1960s, the cultural wave of the 1960s, the anti-authoritarianism, the hippies, all of this cultural revolution, that is what is destabilizing American security, American cities, and that is what's causing the violence. That is, of course, complete. I said I wouldn't swear. That's all a lie. It had nothing to do with culture. It had nothing to do with the civil rights movement. It had nothing to do with the forthcoming women's rights movement. It had nothing to do with the ongoing and upcoming LGBTQ rights movement. It had to do with the changed material conditions. And as every sociologist for decades will tell you, that you get crime, and I'll go through a more in-depth article about this another time. Crime occurs when you have a large concentration of unemployed, destitute men living in a congregate area. And we saw that through a lot of the economic changes of the 1960s. And to try to solve this, the Johnson administration created the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. In July 1967 to publish, okay, how are we going to fix this? There's a massive increase in violent crime across the United States. What are we going to do? And they published it in what's called the report in February of 29th, 1968. And the committee, reading now, the commission offered recommendations to alleviate racial and economic inequality, urging a vast federal spending program on jobs, education, housing to address the socioeconomic conditions underlying the political unrest. They had this massive commission, and they actually addressed what is the correct diagnosis to how do you stop crime? How do you reduce crime? And that is to address the socioeconomic conditions which create it. And for them, that was massive federal investment. Of course, the Johnson administration decided not to do that. And what we got instead was the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, created in 1968, and the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, which encapsulated a number of police quote-unquote reforms, first time we started hearing that phrase, which was a massive federal investment into local police. Rather than doing massive federal investments into the socioeconomic programs, jobs, education, housing, that original commission recommended, they went the complete opposite way to policing. And this was met with bipartisan support across the entire country. And what we needed was more police, better trained police, better funded police. And so that has been the trajectory we have been on since. I'll get to maybe some more ties with the imperial nature of this, but I want to now use that as a framework to enter back into this conversation for the Boston Mayoral Forum. And because I snuck a peek, I know what the first question is. And the first question is concerning police diversity. And I briefly referenced, I believe yesterday, that there is not, or to phrase it better, the data on whether or not increasing diversity within the police force is incredibly skeptical. And most data that exists shows that increasing the racial representation within your police force, which has been ongoing for the last 50 years or so, has not been shown to have really any changes on the function of a police in a society. Because this always goes back to material conditions. If you're investing all of your money and resources in a city into your police, and the function of the police is primarily to protect private property and to sequester and contain the marginalized populations who are living in poverty and destitution, it doesn't really matter the color. And this article I found, it references a number of studies, so I wanted to read it for that. Second, having more black police officers has not resulted in significant improvements in policing or public safety. Some studies suggest that there is no relationship between officer race and police outcomes. For example, research has shown that increased racial minority representation within police agencies is not associated with fewer disparities for these large groups in traffic stops. A 2017 Indiana study did find some modest reductions in police killings related to increased diversity, but only in a small number of big city departments. The rest of the departments in the study showed worse outcomes as diversity increased. Just last year, researchers at the University of Maryland found that black police officers show evidence of the same racial biases as white officers. Continuing, in fact, some studies have shown that black officers may be more likely to discriminate against black civilians and treat them harshly because of increased pressure to adopt the organization role that prescribes such behavior. And it continues. And one of the primary reasons, I'm sure there's quite a few, but the one that I want to highlight is because the idea that increasing racial representation in the police force is going to stop the violence done by the police is because it has a very messed up and flawed understanding of the role that race plays internally in ourselves and in our society. And what I mean by that is, if you think that, oh, well, the problem is that there are just too many racist individual cops, that the problem is that individual police officers who are primarily white are racist, and therefore they are enforcing the law racially by their own individual bias, well then yes, all you would have to do is swap out the racist white cop for a black officer who does not have those same rights or biases, and then you would solve the problem. But of course, as decades have shown us, as any kind of basic understanding of not just the police, but just how people work, that's not how racism is instilled. And also, it is not because of quote unquote bad officers. It is because the actual function and job of the police is to, I'll be a little, I don't know, flippant, is to police, is to surveil, is to patrol, is to beat, is to harass, is to monitor, is to contain your poor populations, which, because of the racist history within this country, is much more vastly overrepresentative of black and brown populations. It doesn't matter how much you diversify your police force. So with that, now let's hear our candidates try to answer this question. And I'm going to try, the mic again is new. Thank you, everyone. Now is a good time again. If you're watching on TikTok, you know I love you. I'd recommend switching to Twitch or Facebook or YouTube because you get to see the cool people. And I'm going to try to hold the mic so that you get the audio.
Next question is a question from Mayoral, Domestic Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. First off, how will you promote diversity in staffing? And secondly, what are the diversity targets and how do you believe the force is?
If you're watching on TikTok, let me just make this visual a little bit better for my other audience. All right, this will be good.
Doing, I believe we're back up at the top.
This is being moderated by Sean Carter from the Herald, and he looks scared during this entire time.
So I think diversity starts with recruitment. We need to have, when I ask my 9-year-old son what he wants to be, who he wants to be, he wants to be a police officer. That is his answer. Part of that is his cousin just came out of the academy and is now part of the police department. And he sees that, he sees him, it's a part of our family. And so our young ones need to be able to have a relationship with the force, see our first responders, all of our first responders, all of our law enforcement agencies around. And so making sure that we give them that exposure, whether they have someone in their family or not. They should be introduced in a positive way, and it should be relationships. I'm a big fan of PAL. I'm a big fan of the Police Athletic League and the work they do there. I'm a big fan of what police officers do on their own, whether it's tennis or some of the work that they do in reading in schools and things like that. As mayor, I will make sure that we have...
All right, let's just actually pause it there and try to understand what John Barros is saying. He's saying his younger, I don't know, maybe he said nephew, 9-year-old, wants to be a police officer. And then he points to because the person's family is a police officer. Then he starts naming all these programs that are basically made so that the police are interacting with children for recruitment. This was all phrased around recruitment. So even from John Barros's own now personal experience, we already have a massive recruitment mechanism to get more police officers. So, which is, again, abhorrent. And like looking back on it, or if you described it as another society, if you just switched it out and you said, do you know that in China, to recruit people for their police, they have Chinese police officers go into the school and read? Did you know that in China, to get more people to join their imperial facetious police state, they have little leagues run by their own police? If you just switched it, everyone would be like, oh my God, that's crazy. Look at how they're indoctrinating their children to join this militaristic force. But we do it here, and it's just praised as like a status quo.
Have more resources and more ability for police to do that. The cadet program is a super important program. It's incredibly important that we continue it. It's incredibly important that we continue to work with the cadet program to strengthen it because it allows us to diversify the pipeline. It allows us to make sure that we can be local. And then I think it's important that we work together to highlight the good things that police are doing. I'm hearing, I just talked to a sergeant today who continues to talk to some of the people some police officers around him about morale. And so, if we continue to, once again,
thank you, whoever just described.
Only talk about the deficits and what we're going to take away, it's not the right frame.
Again, imagine that we have to coddle. The average median salary of a Boston police officer is $120,000 a year. Over 30 police officers' combined salaries is $9.5 million. The idea that in this time, the most important thing is we need to make sure the cops know they're doing a good job. This is so pathetic. I know they're talking to the Boston Police Union, but like I would be insulted if I was a cop and this is how someone talked to me.
Frame is having a vision statement that says we are going to work to have the best police department in the country, the best public safety system in any city, and that's what people are going to want to be part of. People are going to want to be part of something that is positive, something that is forward-looking, and as mayor, I want to make sure that we change that narrative when we get there. Zero tolerance on bad behavior, high standards. Our police officers are for that. Transparency around it, accountability. Our police officers are for that, and we shouldn't be afraid of that, and we should be able to tout the things that we do well so that we can recruit and make sure that we can diversify and make sure that we can stay local.
Thank you. The question now goes to Councillor Sabi George. Again, how would you promote diversity in staffing? Also, what are diversity targets, and how do you believe the force is doing currently?
Thank you. We all of our forums colleagues know Astro the dog usually makes an appearance at some point, and there he is. When we think about diversity in the Boston Police Department in particular, but across all of our first responder agencies, we have to understand the role that recruitment plays and that diversity, the role that retention and efforts around retention plays in increasing that diversity, the role and the critical place that professionalism plays in that diversity, as well as the opportunity for leadership and career paths forward. Those all impact the growing diversity and the need and the ability to have a more diverse workforce. It's so
she said the word diversity like 9 times so far.
That our police department reflects the communities that it serves. And that's certainly a conversation around racial diversity. It's a conversation around ethnic diversity. It's a conversation around language diversity and a conversation around gender diversity. Although we are improving our numbers for sworn police officers across the board, we still have many gaps in representation, especially when it comes to our specialized units, when it comes to leadership positions, and when it comes to command staff. We need to do better, and we need to do that work together. I'm committed to increasing that diversity across the department, and that's around those efforts of recruitment, that's around those efforts around working to retain. And when we think about the conversation around professionalism, we need to encourage Bostonians, our city's residents, our city's young people, to see a reflection of themselves in the workforce. And when we retain and treat our police officers across the board with a certain professionalism, that is reflected in the community.
Oh, she said the word professionalism. And there's a whole paragraph in this book about the changing of the function of the police and to professionalize it. That is, I don't know, it's very mind-chilling. Also, shouldn't like the question be, I mean, Anissa is saying like, we must have our children look at the role of the police as something positive. And so shouldn't the next question just be, well, why is that? Why do we think that the children in Boston have a negative view of the police? What is their experience with the Boston police, which is making it so people are so worried that right now we're talking about recruitment of children to join the police?
And the community then will better engage in exploring career opportunities. We have to, as I mentioned before, expand the cadet program. We have to partner with the Boston Public Schools in order to do that in a really thorough and thoughtful way.
Think of how sick that is. We need to work with our vocational
school, Madison Park Voc Tech School, and our local colleges to recruit young people to explore careers in policing. We need to
again, like the phrasing of recruitment.
That's one of the most difficult things right now in policing nationwide, and it's no exception here in the city of Boston. We need to make sure that
I also don't know why this is like freezing. Okay, come on.
See the possibility of them in policing, that they see opportunities again for career advancement in policing. And for me, a really important piece as mayor, creating true educational incentives for all police officers. It is important to make sure that we have a highly skilled and highly trained workforce, and that can include education that is not directly related to criminal justice or policing. As mayor, I'm committed to working in partnership with our police department, with our police unions, to make sure that we are recruiting highly talented and excited city residents to explore careers in policing and make a lifetime of it.
And honestly, people, I mean, there is no, like, to my knowledge, dearth of people trying to join the police department. And the reason for that, as I said before, is they get paid so much. And so if you make it so that every other municipal job, the only thing that exists, if you want a 6-figure salary with benefits, with a pension, is police, people will do that. Just the natural beating of labor to the point where the only role you can do is the police. And this is the very same thing with our military, that for many people who join, it's because that is the only avenue they have to any sort of security.
Goes to Representative Santiago. How would you promote diversity in staffing, and also what are targets and how are
thank you, Sean. Yes, I will definitely fight for more diversity across the first responder spectrum. And look, it's not just the first responders; it's any municipal agency or department that I will oversee as mayor. I mean, it must reflect the community it serves. I can tell you that in my experiences as a frontline provider, at home and abroad, if you have people who look like you, who share common cultural values, who might share language, you will get better care and you will get better services. So me just saying this has been borne out in study after study from my personal experiences.
And so what he's quoting now, because he always likes to mention how he's a doctor, is that if your doctor comes from the same neighborhood, same language skills, same culture, you have better care. That is absolutely true. And now he's not going to hit this. But now we have to ask ourselves, so why is it true that if you have a more diverse and representative and from the community healthcare sector, that has positive gains, but if you have a more diverse and from the community police, as I talked about a few minutes ago, that doesn't have any change in results. And that's because the nature of our healthcare is actually to do something positive, to actually help people, where the actual function of the police is not that. It is to focus and brutalize that very same population. So this would be a great thing to explore. Why is there such a difference? But John, in his mind, connects the two. Doctors are good things to have, and they play a positive role in society. And police, according to John, play a positive role in society, despite, again, the ample amount of data that we have that is absolutely not true.
Look, we know diversity has increased, but there's still more to do. And the first thing I will do is I work hand in hand across the board with BPD, with the unions, and with the Civil Service Commission to increase diversity across the board. And I believe each of those institutions have an important role for that. And those are the first people I will meet with, sit down with, and have a conversation about this. Is how can we do this together? And again, this is not just about race and gender, right? This is about making sure that our homegrown residents, have the opportunity to become the next crop of first responders. And so I'll explore things like perhaps extra plans for BPS graduates, really looking into cadet programs. We know that has resulted in an increase in people of color joining first responder units. But let me just reiterate, this will be done in conjunction with all stakeholders, including people on this very phone call right now. There's a way to come together to really advance this mutually shared goal of diversifying.
John probably has John and the other John have the worst with policies.
So with respect to diversity targets,
and that's why all they do is talk about having conversations.
They want to hear what their concerns are, and because again, the best
because they really don't have any ideas.
I'm looking forward to really elevating the voices of stakeholders to make sure that I can implement and facilitate their best judgment.
Thank you very much. And now the question goes to Councillor Wu. Same question.
See how Michelle answers those speakers.
And also, what are diversity targets, and how do you believe the force is doing?
Thanks, Sean. I think we're all old hands at this, so we can basically take the question once at the beginning, I think, in each one. But I'll let my colleagues speak for themselves too. I would say the police department, as every city department, should be reflective of the population and demographics of our city. That we want targets that reflect our Boston neighborhoods, so that each community, and as so many of my colleagues have said before, that our young people see themselves reflected in and feel connected to all of our city workforce. So I support efforts that Leo has been leading in terms of ensuring that we are trying to increase the residency, the length of residency that would factor into preference for joining the force, to expand the cadet program to, as we have moved beyond a racially discriminatory promotional exam. I support efforts to ensure that we are thinking about promotions outside of just the simple tests, and to take into account other factors that are very relevant to ensuring that we are serving the community. And to continue building opportunities for multilingual residents to join the force. But the bottom line is that if we want these roles to reflect our community, we want our community to want these roles. We need to make these good jobs that have a good standard of living.
I just spoke to the fact that they've already done that through the salaries they're giving them. The problem is not that the community or people in the community don't want to get a $120,000 a year job with time off and benefits and a pension. They have already incentivized people here in Boston to do that. The only thing that she mentioned that, I'm a police abolitionist, but whatever, is the residency requirement. Because what you do see, and this is all over the country, is police officers who live in the suburbs who then go and they work in the inner city police force. So they are taking massive amount of money from the municipal budget, terrorizing that local community, encaging that local community, and then they're going home to the suburbs where they then spend the money that, again, they took from the municipal budgets. So the residency, actually making sure that if you're going to have police, they have to actually live in that area, so that that area at least sees some of the economic benefit that the municipal budget is paying for. Residency is fine. If she spent the 3 minutes talking about that, I'm fine. But now going into, we need to make sure these are good paying jobs. No. Actually, we need to be doing the exact opposite. We need to be lowering how much we're paying for the police. We can't pay the police $120,000 a year for the median salary and then still have a fully operating city budget, because you are taking those resources from another area. You're taking them from school teachers. You're taking them from housing. You're taking them from transportation. You're taking them from infrastructure. So the point is not to make the police the highest paid positions in city government. That is what you do if you want to continue the recruitment pipeline to them. But if you actually maybe want to reduce crime, then you do what I talked about earlier, and you actually have to address the socioeconomic conditions of the area, not good paying police jobs.
There's tremendous stress and a high incidence of mental health and physical health issues because of various dynamics, long hours are worked per week. We need to solve the systemic issues that are making it difficult for the officers who are working very hard every single day to serve the community, who feel that there is an ongoing gap and mistrust from the community because of the nature of the system. So to get us to the point
See,
where
name that. The people in the community feel a distrust towards the police, and then rather than saying because the function of the police has been to harass and terrorize them, what was her response? What did she label it as? Gotta go back.
the point where the entire community sees this as a job that would be healthy, helpful, productive, connected to community, we do need to build back that trust. Resolve issues around accountability in terms of how we're using our resources and overtime. Ensure that we are
Did I go back?
I have put forward an objective discipline matrix, which would guarantee consistency across the board.
I don't know, maybe
as
I missed
discipline for offenses or other actions have been carried out, so that there's not racial bias or favoritism injected in the treatment of particular officers relative to each other. To ensure that across the board,
Hold on, gotta go back because I want to hear what she said. So
our
I can
community.
comment
We
on
want
it.
our community to want these roles. We need to make these good jobs that have a good standard of living. There's tremendous stress and a high incidence of mental health and physical health issues because of various dynamics, long hours are worked per week. We need to solve the systemic issues that are making it difficult for the officers who are working very hard every single day to serve the community, who feel that there's an ongoing gap and mistrust from the community because
Okay, police officers who feel there's an ongoing gap and mistrust in the community because the role and function of the police has been to terrorize this population?
of the nature of the system. So
Because of the nature of the system. So, what does that mean? And this is why I was frustrated with Michelle in the first part of this, and I guess I still am for the second part, is what does that mean in the nature of the system? You actually have a chance right now to talk directly to police officers, and obviously would not be as hostile or as antagonistic as I am championing in my vocabulary or tone, but to actually name, well, what is that? Why does the community have such distrust of the Boston Police Department? Is it because of the massive overtime scandal? Is it because that it was found out that they elected a pedophile to run their union? Is it because of the disproportionate amount that black and brown teenagers are stopped and frisked in Boston? Is it the fact that we still maintain a stop and frisk policy in Boston? Is it because we have 700 police cameras circled in the black, brown, and poor neighborhoods of Boston that are constantly surveilling these populations? Is it because of a brick system which gives point value to teenagers if your cousin is wearing a certain color? Maybe these are all those actual structural things which just makes it so people have a natural distrust and disdain towards the police. Name that stuff. Actually call it out.
to get us to the point where the entire community sees this as a job that would be healthy, helpful, productive, connected to community, we do need to build back that trust. Resolve issues around accountability in terms of how we're using our resources and overtime. Ensure that we are implementing what I have put forward, an objective discipline matrix, which would guarantee consistency across the board.
No, I gotta check out this matrix.
Offenses or other actions have been carried out, so that there's not racial bias or favoritism injected in the treatment of particular officers relative to each other, and to ensure that across the board we are, again, reimagining, redefining how our officers are serving the community, so that we see that value in that partnership.
Thank you very much. And so the next question comes from the Boston Patrolmen's Association. There's been some talk, particularly last year on the City Council, about making police contracts public policy documents and sort of looking to shift some of the bargaining away from the mayor and involve the council more. Would that happen if you were mayor? We'll start with, I believe, Councilor Sabi George.
Yeah, so this is a really important part because right now the police unions negotiate with the mayor basically in secret, and then they create their contract, and then whenever the city council is pretending like they're going to do anything, the police say, oh, you know, we would do that, but it's in our union contract, so no, we can't. We have to continue to do this. And so this effort is to be like, okay, well, this is a goddamn, it's paid for through the municipal budget. It should be a public document. It should have something that has open transparency and communication because of just how much money is given to the Boston Police Department. I don't know the extent that the Boston Teachers Union goes through the same open, transparent process. I'm 100% in favor of that as well. So let's see how they answer.
George is the first up this time.
Here we go. And thank you for the question. And certainly this is an ongoing discussion at the city council and eventually in partnership with the mayor's office. Those conversations are important ones to have, and those policy contracts and policy documents topic areas are ones that have actually encouraged the city council and created for the city council an opportunity to discuss some of these details in greater detail. For example, through those hearings, we've talked about the role of uniformed police officers in more administrative roles. And through that, I've learned how that actually plays a really important role in policing. And then that's something that we actually should embrace and make sure that we are creating those opportunities for police work to happen in different ways and in those administrative ways. So although I'm grateful for those conversations around the policy documents that are before the city council today, and it has kept us, under the leadership of a few of my colleagues, it has kept us engaged in some of those details and in deeper understanding of your work, I don't believe that they should impact the contract negotiations.
Okay, I was going to say, eventually she's going to hit a point, which is Anissa saying what the cops want to hear, which is, oh, don't worry, we're going to keep the union contract secret. If I'm mayor, I'm going to make sure that I use the power of the office to create this hidden process where we negotiate things, we negotiate the rules that the police have to follow, and then the city council can complain about it later, and then all you have to say is, it's in our contract, nothing we can do. It's in our contract, nothing we can do.
Contract negotiations between
took her 9 pretzel turns to get to that point.
The negotiating team is one that I hold very sacred. I am a former union member, as a former teacher in Boston, a member of the Boston Teachers Union, and we need to make sure that we have an ability to openly, through our appropriate protocols and processes,
to openly, through the appropriate protocols and processes, to openly, in secret, behind back doors, do stuff.
We negotiate contracts here in the city. So I won't sign those as your mayor, but I do think the discussions that are happening around those topic areas
they love discussions.
For us to have.
All these people who want to do nothing, they love discussions. They love to talk.
More fully appreciate the work that happens every single day by the men and women of the Boston Police Department.
And just to be clear on that, so would you support making it a public policy?
Sean has to. I followed it, Sean. I know his stuff.
I think I made it very clear I would not.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
No, you didn't make it clear, Anissa. It took you like 9 pretzel turns to get to the point.
Thank you, Sean. Listen, the buck stops with the mayor. When it comes to the police department, it is the mayor that appoints a commissioner. It is the mayor who is tasked with public safety, and therefore it should be the mayor, not the city council, that negotiates the contract.
Yeah, they're all. This is all just catering to the Boston Police Union.
The kitchen. The city council currently has a role. The role is to ratify the agreement. Morale is low right now. Trust is eroding. We need a collective bargaining apparatus that will allow for the least amount of politicization. And I don't think.
Again, but the idea that doing something behind closed doors reduces politicization.
The city council's role in that will help matters.
This guy's a state representative.
Thank you. The same question to Councilor Wu.
And he answered that in like 9 seconds. This guy has no idea what's going on.
As mayor, I will be the one negotiating the contract and ensuring that the city's team is working to settle items across the table with each one of our bargaining units in terms of our our public employee unions. But I want to emphasize that regardless of whether each one of us as candidates says that we support a contract as a public policy document or not, it is a public policy document. Our contracts with our city unions very much reflect the values of each administration and whether we are living out what we say when it comes to fair wages and working conditions and all of the terms that are in there. As mayor, I would create a chief of worker empowerment whose job would be not only to think about how we interface with various parts of workforce development and training and industries outside of City Hall, but to also be in charge of making sure that we live out those values through our contracts, which are public policy documents in City Hall. That means we would seek not to let contracts expire, right? As of June 30th, the police union contract will be a year expired. We should not be having those lapses. We should be sitting and at the table trying to get those done. But that requires transparency as well. I, as mayor, will not be afraid of being public about what the issues are and how we can strive to get them done together, to involve the general public, to involve the city council in helping to have a conversation about what's important for our city, not in the day-to-day of negotiations back and forth across the table, but to make sure that we are opening up the power that the city has to change dynamics with every part of our policy-making process. That's through budgets, that's through programming, and that's to ensure that our contracts also reflect those values. I put forward a very specific plan for how I would approach contract negotiations with the Boston police unions. So that is up on my website. It's michelleforboston.com. It includes pieces of what I would put forward as major priorities, pieces that I believe we need to seek deep changes on embedded into the contract, and also pieces where I believe we can move to a different system that would create a framework for
Okay.
greater trust and greater transparency.
I wanted to make
in
sure
how
that she
we're
was going to
relationship
say,
between
no, we're
public
going
safety,
to
public health, and our
democratize and make this more transparent than it currently is. I have not read Michelle's plan on that, but I'm glad she didn't hedge that. Oh, John has, another guy has no idea what's going on.
The contract being something that is negotiated by the BPD and the other unions and the mayor. It is something that should be negotiated by those who are working, about their working conditions, about their job, about their dignity, about their pay, and what they deserve. But it needs to be informed by a public discussion. In fact,
Hey, all right,
the public
John.
is discussing it and
You
pushing,
didn't
and
just
people are
cater.
clearly engaging about what policing should be, and I think it is to the benefit of both the mayor and the police force to have conversations about policing, whether in city council or different hearings. It's important so that when we hear, in fact, that people want to see more diversity in the command staff, or that people want more local residents of Boston to be on the police force, that in fact we're talking together about maybe how the contract might be an instrument to make that happen. It is really important that we allow ourselves to be part of that public conversation, that we can build trust and relationship and confidence in the police department and in what we're trying to do. But let me just be clear, Sean. The men and women of the police department have the right to collectively bargain, and they have the right to collectively have conversations about their workspace, their pay, their benefits in a way that is not infringed and negotiated in public. I think it would be unfair.
Well, see, this is the funniest thing about this guy, is that while he's talking, he will convince himself of one way, and then 30 seconds later go the complete opposite way. Like, he definitely said in the first part of this segment that it needs to be open, democratic, people need to have a say. And then it's almost like someone messaged him on the screen saying, no, John, that's actually not your position. Your position is that the union contract's going to be maintained opaque, secret. You got to reverse it right now. And then go, oh, okay. He has done this on like 2 to 3 different issues. We're going to listen to this guy again. This guy, completely pointless to be in the office.
By the BPD and the other unions and the mayor. It is something that should be negotiated by those who are working, about their working conditions, about their job, about their dignity, about their pay, and what they deserve. But it needs to be informed by a public discussion. In fact, it is informed by a public discussion. The public is already discussing it and pushing, and people are...
Okay, now I see what he did. The secret negotiations have to be informed by a public discussion. And again, it's just more of this talk of you will be heard. We're going to have so many public talks and conversations and discussions about the role of police and what we want the police to be. Okay, thank you. And now the actual decision makers are going to go behind a locked room in secret negotiate a contract, and that's what's going to be binding. But didn't you feel part of the process?
Clearly engaging about
People.
what policing should be.
Absolutely
and
disgusting.
I think it is to the benefit of both the mayor and the police force to have conversations about policing, whether in city council or different hearings. It's important so that when we hear, in fact, that people want to see more diversity in the command staff, or
why is that important if you're going to just actually make the decision making in a secret area? Why does it matter that you have to sit through a 2-hour session and pretend to listen?
It's really important that we allow ourselves to be part of that public conversation so that we can build trust and relationship and confidence in the police department.
How do you build trust in relationships and confidence if you listen to someone talk and then say, okay, but now the adults are going to go in a room behind closed doors and make the actual decisions?
And what we're trying to do. But let me just be clear, Sean. The men and women of the police department have the right to collectively bargain, and they have the right to collectively have conversations about their workspace, their pay, their benefits in a way that is not infringed and negotiated in public. I think it would be unfair, and I think that every mayor and me as mayor.
Why would that be
sitting
unfair?
down and talking about point to point with the different negotiation teams.
It's a public contract using public funds. Why is it unfair to have those negotiations be public?
And make it a fair conversation and not one that is marred by a lot of different conversations held in hearings.
God. The two Johns completely point. All right, hold on. I'm going to listen to this question. I'm going to end it here. I just want to hear what the question is. Maybe we'll come back to this. There's still the Boston Mayoral Forum about housing that happened last Thursday. There was a Boston Pride Forum that the same 4 attended. Kim Janey and Andrea skipped it. I'm very curious how that conversation went. Let's just hear this question real quick.
From Boston EMS, the union, and so the Boston EMS contends that because of lack of permanent infrastructure dedicated to EMS units, ambulances are forced to post at street corners for the entirety of their shifts. Therefore, EMTs and paramedics are often sitting and running ambulances for 8 to 16 hours a day. What would would you do about this? What can be done about this?
Oh yeah, if you ever want to look at something that would blow your mind, it's how ambulances are paid for and used in city governments. They're mostly private forces. We've basically privatized the entire like EMT structures within basically every city. I'm curious if Boston has followed suit with that, but it is heavily, heavily privatized. Always trying to cut corners, always trying to increase profit for whoever owns the company. It's insane that we allow our ambulances to be as privatized as they are. Maybe I'll do some research and look into exactly Boston's deal, but for a lot of cities in the country, that's the case. But all right, let's close it there. I'm gonna say goodbye to the one at a time. The YouTube, Facebook. What else?